guys, it's Allison. I have a great collection of books for you today, books I've been reading in January 2023 and into February. They're all pretty new. Two are from 2022 and the rest are from 2023. So if you're looking for some new books to read, I've got some reviews for you. And definitely stick around because I've also got some little interesting facts that you're going to want to know about each of these books. The first book is The Makeup Test by Jenny L. Howe. This is a rom-com, kind of a second chance romance, enemies to lovers type book. It's about a young woman named Allison who's starting a prestigious PhD program in medieval lit. And she's kind of thrown off guard when her ex, named Colin, shows up in the same PhD program. Now this is her ex from undergrad who broke her heart. And he also kind of stole her academic thunder. And she's really upset when she finds out that she has to TA with him, with this professor that she's been wanting to work with, and that they're actually competing for this mentorship that she's been dreaming of. Now, Colin is intent on convincing her that he's changed and that she should take him back. Now, I'm not a big rom-com reader, and enemies to lovers is really not always my favorite kind of trope in this genre, and unfortunately I just wasn't really all that convinced by Colin. I wasn't rooting for him and Allison to get together all that much. He was kind of insufferable, and I honestly did not find it convincing that he had changed. Allison I liked, and I like a good romance set in academia, but without a compelling love interest to root for, this really just kind of ended up okay for me. Now, some things to know about this book. Now, Howe was actually inspired by her own experience as a medieval literature grad student. She's actually a professor now. And I love that she's this very serious literature academic who also writes rom-coms. And the few videos I've seen of her, she actually seems like kind of a delight. And one thing that she said is important to her in her books is that she gives plus-size main characters a happily ever after. She seems to do this in all of her writing. And she says that she wants main characters that look like her to have these wonderful romances as well. She also says she likes to include animals in her books because they tend to give insight into characters in just kind of a different way, which is something I enjoy. And there are definitely a couple of animals in this book. So that, again, is The Makeup Test by Jenny L. Howe. The next book is Kea Dass Second Act by Sopan Deb. Now, this is about a girl named Kea Dass who, when she was a teenager, she told her family that she was in love with her best friend, Pamela. Now, it didn't go very well telling her Bengali family that she was a lesbian. Unfortunately, soon after that, Kea died in a car accident. Now, since then, her family, her mother, her father, and her sister have all been struggling with the way that they reacted and their grief and their regrets. And when they find a box in the attic that has a bunch of letters and also a play that Kea wrote with Pamela, they decide that putting on the play might be a way to honor Kea. Now, I found that this one had a little bit of a slow start with kind of a confusing second plot line that didn't seem to tie in very clearly with the main story. But once we got into the action of the story, the putting on the play, it definitely went much faster. I also liked how it examined this Bengali family who's American and how they sort of try to resolve their cultural expectations with the American culture that they're also living in. Some things to know about this book. Deb was inspired by his own upbringing in the Bengali community in New Jersey, and he wanted to explore some things that are kind of unusual in the Bengali community, especially for the older generations, things like dating and divorce and therapy. But as he was writing, it was important to him that the Bengali community also not be othered. So throughout the book, he doesn't define a lot of traditionally Bengali things like holidays that people who are within the community would know. So there's a lot to learn when reading the book, especially since I'm not very familiar with Bengali culture and how the community observes a lot of those traditions in the US. Here I just want to stop for a second and say, if you like this kind of behind the book content that I'm throwing in here and there, just give me a quick subscribe. That tells me that you want more of this, and I will continue to do this in future videos. So next I want to talk about a bunch of audiobooks that I listened to this past month. The first is called The Good Life: Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study of Happiness. Now, this was written by the current directors of the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which has been going on for over 80 years. And it makes the case that relationships are really what makes for a long and happy life. And not only are these strong connections what make for a happy life, but they're also predictors of the overall health of our body and our brains. So the book delves into a lot of what's been found over the years in this study, and it also kind of goes into all the different types of relationships, friendship, romantic, familial, etc., and how we can and should cultivate them in order to live what they call the good life. I have to say that I'm a major introvert, and I think COVID has made me even more so, but I think this book has definitely pushed me to make more of an effort to cultivate a lot of my relationships and reach out more, because I know that I always feel better when I do that. And it's definitely a balance between getting the solitude that sometimes feels good and also spending time with people in ways that also feels good. Some things to know about this book. Now, most of the facts are in the book itself, so I do recommend you read it or listen to it. It's a good listen. But one of the authors, Robert Waldinger, is actually the 4th director of the Harvard study. They hope and expect that the study will continue for many more decades in the future. When the study began in the 1930s, it actually had 2 groups of young men that it followed. One was a group of Harvard students, and the other was a group of young men who lived in the Boston inner city. And again, the overarching finding, regardless of background, is that it's relationships and strong connections that are the ultimate predictor of happiness and success. Now, they do acknowledge the lack of diversity in the study from the very beginning, and they've been working to correct that to include women and people of color. And now that they've been collecting since the 1930s, many of the children of the original participants are now participating in the study. So they have just tons of data on happiness, health, and the ways that people live. The next audiobook that I listened to is called Adelaide by Genevieve Wheeler. This is about a young American woman living in England. She's fairly privileged. She has a good job, good friends, and she also struggles a bit with relationships. She had an abusive one in her teens that make her wary of entering into a new relationship. But when she meets this young man named Rory, she just kind of falls head over heels for him right from the start. He's kind of ambivalent to her, kind of stringing her along, but she convinces herself that it's love. And when he experiences a tragedy, she just turns herself inside out for him, and he starts to demand more from her. I just found this to be such a poignant novel about how people, and women in particular, are just prone to be so self-sacrificing. And when manipulative people see this, they just take advantage of it so easily. So then these women, like Adelaide, just lose themselves, and they suppress any real human needs that they have until they eventually reach a tipping point. Now, Adelaide is sweet and a little naive, and you might kind of feel frustrated with her. I know I did, but it's the kind of frustration you feel looking back at yourself when you were that age and probably making kind of similar mistakes. And you realize where your frustration really should be directed is at this person who is taking advantage of her kindness. Her problems with relationships aren't the most tragic thing in the world, but that's also kind of the point. They feel monumental to her, and sacrificing herself at the altar of somebody else's struggles doesn't do anything to serve herself. So to sum up, I mostly loved Adelaide, even when I was frustrated with her. I hated Rory, but he definitely felt familiar to me. And I loved Adelaide's friends and all the real-life friends around the world who hold people up and help keep them going. This book will not be for everyone, but there was some nuance here about this particular time of life that I really appreciated. Now, a couple things to know about this book. Adelaide and Rory are kind of center stage here in the novel, but it's really the friends that shine. Genevieve Wheeler based a lot of the friends in her book on her real-life friends, and she pays tribute to a lot of them on her Instagram. And this was an advanced listener copy from Libro FM, and it's out in April. The next book I want to talk about is I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai. Now, this is probably my most anticipated book of 2023, and it definitely didn't disappoint. Mackay's previous book, The Great Believers, is one of my all-time favorites, so if you haven't read that book, go read it and then pick up this one and read this one. The main character in this book is named Bodie Kane. She is a woman in her 40s who's a podcaster and a film professor. In high school, she attended this boarding school in New Hampshire called Granby, and she's not nostalgic about her time there. She was kind of a misfit at the time, kind of low-income student, came from Indiana, and she didn't always have the best experiences there. But worst of all was that in her senior year, her former roommate named Thalia was murdered. So when Bodie is invited back to Granby to teach a course, she's kind of pulled back into the case of Thalia's murder when some of her students choose to examine it on their podcast. She starts to doubt that the black athletic trainer who was convicted of Thalia's murder was actually guilty at all. And instead, she begins to suspect that a beloved music teacher, one that she actually loved as well, might have had an inappropriate relationship with her and might have been involved with Thalia's murder. One of the unique constructs of this book is that she actually narrates directly to this music teacher named Mr. Block. Now, this book doesn't top The Great Believers for me, but one thing that Makkai did so well in that book that she also does in this book is just this fantastic juxtaposition between past and present, and she's just really masterful at this, and I love reading it when she puts together a book like this. I also loved how she examined memory and kind of the phenomenon of teen life and how all of the trappings of that and the emotions that accompany everything that goes along with being a teenager can color our perceptions of things and also our memories of things. Even though this is a literary mystery. I was really hooked by both the plot and the mystery itself, as well as the character development and the writing. I love how she kind of peeled back the layers of the characters that Bodhi thought she knew as a teenager and revealed more about them from an adult lens, which again is kind of that juxtaposition of past and present that she's so good at. One of the most interesting threads is on the value and the harm of our fascination with true crime stories and the podcasts that are so common these days about true crime. I have to say that my only complaint about this book was the sheer volume of characters. Now, this is something I always have a little bit of trouble tracking, especially in audio format. But other than that, it didn't really take away from the book, and I could always figure out who was who. And of course, Julia Whalen narrates this, so the narration is fantastic, and this will definitely be one of my top books of the year. Some things to know about this book. She starts many of the passages of the book by cataloging, just in very short snippets, numerous crimes against women and girls. And this is one of the themes of the book, kind of the harm to the bodies of women and girls, both harm done by others and by themselves. And there's also kind of this sense of how we need to reckon with that harm if we can survive it. Mackay addresses race and the possible wrongful conviction of a black man through the lens of whiteness and what that means within the criminal justice system as far as privilege and protection. She says, "The one inherent structural flaw that I could not get away from is that because this is Bodhi's story, Omar's story is fundamentally not centered. If I were going to level a criticism at my own book, one that I really couldn't write my way out of, it would be that the book itself is marginalizing this guy's experience because it's not about him." There are so many great facts that Mackay always brings up in her interviews about her books. I may give this book the full story of the story treatment that I've given for books like A Little Life, which I have a video for, and Mackay's other book, The Great Believers, which I do not yet, but I will link both of those below if you'd like to see what that means. I just have to say as well that Rebecca Mackay retweeted my story of the story about The Great Believers. Definitely check that out because she enjoyed it herself. Now, the next book I want to talk about is All the Dangerous Things by Stacey Willingham. This is a domestic thriller about a mother named Isabel whose infant son Mason was taken from his room 1 year prior. Since then, she has not slept because she is obsessed with finding out what happened to Mason. Her husband has left her, the police are tired of her, and she's kind of haunting these true crime conferences, just trying to get some attention on the case. She starts working with a true crime podcaster to bring this story back into the limelight. Now, you can imagine that her persistently sleepless state has her in kind of this strange daze where she's starting to question her own memories and what she knows and what she understands about the people around her and what happened that night. It starts to bring up memories of her past that may actually be connected to what happened to Mason. So it's a really interesting examination of sleep disorders and how this can affect people. I usually kind of hate this thriller trope of kind of the unreliable, crazy woman that nobody really trusts and nobody really believes. But in this case, it actually worked really well with this desperate mother who's been sleepless and has a history of sleepwalking. And the reader is sort of brought into kind of her daily fever dream of trying to figure it all out and just get through to the next day and get to a resolution and find her son. I was completely hooked on this audiobook. It was dark and surprising and actually completely satisfying. Now, some things to know about this book. Stacey Willingham was inspired to write this book when she heard the story of a man who was attending true crime conferences to get attention on a family member's murder. And she was struck by the contrast between the people who were attending kind of for entertainment purposes and these families that were attending and dealing with their grief while also trying to get attention on the cases of their loved ones. Now, this is Willingham's second book. Her first book, A Flicker in the Dark, has been optioned for television, and her third book will be a dark academia psychological thriller. Next, I will probably be reading the next book in the Finlay Donovan series, Finlay Donovan Jumps the Gun, and I think on audio I'm probably going to be listening to Big Swiss, which looks very weird and kind of funny. I have a couple of thrillers kind of in my backlog, but I need a bit of a switch from that, so I'm moving more towards funny next, and hopefully those will be good choices for me. So if you learned something new here or found a new book for your TBR, give me a like, and if you read any of these books, let me know in the comments what you thought of them. Thanks for watching!